Shalom lekulam. I want to tell you about two of my heroes today. What they both have in common is that I heard both of these stories personally. Both of these people exemplify courage and bravery, and the third thing is both of their stories are filled with nisim, with miracles. The first story is about my father. In 1967, my father made Aliyah to Israel, and he was working on a kibbutz, Ramat Rachel, in Yerushalayim. One day he was sitting on the field working on his tractor, and all of a sudden he started to hear explosions going off all around him. He was in a daze. Nothing like this had ever happened to him. He didn't know what to do. He sat there still, unmoving, until his friend yelled at him, Michael, yalla, ratz, ratz, ratz. And they ran together to the bomb shelter. They're sitting down there, terrified. Bombs are going off all around them. There's a man walking around with a tray with cups of lemonade, and my father's thinking to himself, I'm thirsty, but I don't want to drink, because if I do, I'm going to have to use the bathroom. And the bathroom is upstairs outside of the shelter. A few hours go by, the bombs stop. It's quiet for at least an hour. My father thinks, I'm going to start drinking now. Starts 1 cup of lemonade, 2 cup of lemonade, 5 or 6 cup of lemonades, and I really got to go to the bathroom. It's safe, it's quiet up there, so he goes up out of the shelter. He goes to the restroom. He's standing there doing what he needs to do in the restroom. There's a window right here. He's about to finish, and all of a sudden, boom! An explosion. Not but 20 feet away from the window, a grenade goes off. And my father never tells me whether he finished or not, lo chashuv, it's not important. But he runs. And as he's running back towards the shelter, there are bombs going off all sides of him. He knows that he's going to die now. And the only way back to the shelter is over a wall that was no less than 12 or 13 feet. My father doesn't know how he did this. To this day, he doesn't understand. But something inside of him, some strength that he never had again, allowed him to jump over that wall. He made it over that wall, maybe climbing, he doesn't even remember, and he made it back to the bomb shelter where he survived. Immediately after the attack, his roommate, one of his dearest friends, went to the army to serve. His friend never came back from the army. He died in the '67 war. My father promised himself, for the honor of his friend, that he would take his place in the army. So my father joined the army, he joined Sahal, he fought for the next 2 years, and thank God he survived. But for me, this is true courage, true strength, and it was a miracle that he survived. And I want to tell you one more story of another man. His name is Jan Viner. He is from the Czech Republic, and his story, or he is known as bojovnik, which means fighter. Why? He's about 90 years old today, and to this day, every morning he wakes up, goes to his garage, he lives in the United States of America, and he practices boxing. He used to be a boxer in the Royal Air Force. This is how his story begins. When he was very, very young, about 1933, he was still only a child. Hitler was coming into power, and everyone knew that a great terror was coming to the land. But the Czech people, the Bohemian people, knew that this was the time to fight. So much so that they actually had their soldiers marching in the street with their weapons, ready to fight in 1933 against Adolf Hitler. They were ready to fight. But the powers that be, Churchill, all the great countries got together and said, we don't want a war. So they said to the Czech people, go home. Put down your guns. Let Hitler have your land. This is the world in which Jan Viner grew up. So when he was a little bit older, 14, 15, the Holocaust really began. In their town, there were letters going out to the home saying, you need to show up at this office at such and such a time. And Jan didn't know exactly, actually, what was going to happen, but he knew anyone that went to that, soon they would leave on a train and they would never come back. But he was a strong and brave man, so he went to that office. He went inside, he sat down, looked at some old gent, and the guy said to him, Jew, tell me how many shirts you have. And Jan said, I have 10 shirts. The man said, 2 shirts. He was taking away the Jews' clothing and leaving them maybe 1 shirt they could take with them to the camps. He said, tell me how many socks you have. I have 15 pairs of socks. He said, no, you only have 3. And he said, how many shoes do you have? I have 4. He looked up, he scoffed, and he said, Jew, you won't even be able to wear out 1 pair. Jan didn't ask any more questions. He got up and he left. And as soon as this happened, his family realized that if they were to go on the train that they were told to show up at, they'd never return. So Jan's father and his stepmother ran off to a small cottage outside of town where they could hide. Jan went with them. He met up after them. And his father sat him down one night and he said, Jan, there's no reason to run anymore. We're going to die anyways. Let's die like men on our own terms. He pulled out a bottle and he said, this is a bottle of pills, suicide pills. We've already taken them. I want you to take them too, my son. Join us. Jan didn't respond. He didn't take the pills. He held his father's hand, and his father, like a man, died in his son's arms. And after that, Jan made a decision. He was going to live. So he ran long into the night. He made it to the railroad station with a train that was going out of Germany towards Italy, but he was a Jew. He couldn't get on the train. So what did he do? He found some loose rope, and when no guards were looking, he tied himself to the bottom of the train. He actually happened to be under the car where the bathroom was, meaning his head, where the bathroom empties out, this close together. So for 2 days, not sleeping, because if he had fallen asleep, he would have fallen off and died. He had to lie tied to the bottom of the train with an awful smell, but he survived. He made it into Italy, and the moment he arrived, what happened? The Italian police officers grabbed him, brought him to the Italian police office, threw him in a room and locked the door. And what did he think? This is my death. This is the end of my life. As he's sitting there, the head of the police came in, closed the door, sat down and said, "Jew, what's your name?" He said, "Jan." He said, "What you have done is a crime. The punishment is clear." Then he paused, smiled and said, "You're an enemy of the Germans. We hate them so much." So the Italian head of the police got up, opened the door, went over, sat down, and just stopped paying attention. And Jan was allowed to walk free because of the mutual hatred of the Nazis. The first miracle for Jan Weiner. Jan continued to run in through the night, and he arrived at a house. And it was raining outside, and he didn't know what to do, so he went inside of the barn. He climbed under a pile of hay and prayed and went to sleep. When he woke up in the morning, standing around him was the whole family and the father. And he said, "This is it. He's going to turn me into the Nazis. I survived only to die here." And instead, the man put out his hand, helped Jan up, brought him into the house, gave him dry clothes, gave him soup, and said, "Jew, I don't care what you have done. You need a place to sleep and food to eat. It's yours." This family went so far as to even lie to the Nazis who came looking for Jews. And in that house, he survived. Finally, he was able to get a boat leaving for Great Britain. And instead of hiding and running the entire war, he joined the Royal Air Force. And there he was able to spend the rest of the war fighting. Up in the air, living. He was able to live through that war and still fight for the people he loved and the many people lost. Finally, the war ended, and he returned to his home in the Czech lands. He went to his old house, not knowing what to expect. He opened the door, and the person that was there to meet him was some German person. Many of the Nazis had put in German people in the homes of Jews. This German person may not have done anything, but Jan had a lot of anger to get out. So what he did, curled up his fist, knocked the person right on his face. He spent the next night in jail, but the officers were, "We can't leave this Jew in jail after all that he's been through." But then as Jan was living with a friend down the street, he heard that the person at the beginning of the story, the one who had asked him, "How many shirts do you have?" was still alive, still working in the exact same office building. And Jan decided revenge must come now. So he got a gun, prepared himself, and he went to the office. Went to the secretary and said, "Is Mr. So-and-so here?" And she said, "Of course, do you have an appointment?" He said, "No." She said, "Sit down, he'll meet you." And finally he went into the office, and this man didn't recognize Jan. It had been years. And he said, "Please come sit down, Mr. Weiner, please. How can I help you? What can I do for you?" Jan said, "You don't remember me?" And the man said, "No, I'm sorry. Should I remember you from somewhere?" And then Jan looked at him right in the eye, and he said, "Jew, you won't even wear out one pair of shoes." The man's heart started to beat quickly. At that moment, Jan pulled out the gun, cocked back the trigger, and held it to the man's face. He was ready to kill him. This man deserved death for what he had done. At that moment, Jan thought to himself, this is what the last many years of my life have been about, killing. I have to stop here. I am not a Nazi. I am not a murderer. I'm a man. So he uncocked the gun, put it back in his pocket, curled up his fist, and knocked the guy flat on his face. And at that moment, he decided that he didn't want to be a fighter anymore. He wanted to be a teacher. So he left his Czech home, and he came to the United States of America to become a teacher. He's been teaching for almost 40 years. And every year, once a year, he comes to the Czech Republic to teach. And that's where I met Jan Weiner. He took me around, and he showed me his home that he fought for. And to this day, it is my joy and my honor to tell his story. The story of a fighter and the story of my father, who both live and are both teachers. So those are my heroes, and I hope to hear about many of yours. Toda rabah.